The galaxy had always been a tidy place, or so the Galactic Union liked to think. For millions of years, alien species followed a clear path: grow smarter, build better ships, join the Union, and sip fancy drinks at council meetings. Rules kept everything in line. No one stepped out of turn. Then there was Earth, a noisy, messy speck in a quiet corner of space. To the Union, humans were a puzzle that didn't fit. They'd barely figured out how to leave their planet, yet they'd already invented things that made no sense, like machines that argued with you or food that exploded in your mouth for fun. The Union's leaders, a council of tall, silver-skinned beings called the Vorin, decided enough was enough. Earth needed to be tamed. It started on a cloudy Tuesday. A fleet of Union ships, gleaming like polished knives, appeared in Earth's orbit. Hundreds of them, each one bigger than a city, hummed with power. Their message boomed across every screen and radio on the planet: surrender and accept our guidance, or face correction. The Vorin expected panic, tears, maybe a few weak attempts at fighting back. They'd done this before. Smaller species always gave in. But humans? They didn't even blink. Down on Earth, in a cluttered workshop tucked under a mountain, Mia adjusted her goggles and grinned at a flickering screen. She was an engineer with wild hair and a habit of talking to her tools. For years, she'd been building things the government called too dangerous or too weird. A satellite that could fry a ship with plasma. A drone that screamed insults in binary. She'd hidden them away, waiting for a reason to flip the switch. Now, as the Union's message echoed through her radio, she clapped her hands. Finally, she said to herself, a real test. Across the planet, in a dusty airfield, Leo was already climbing into a cockpit. He was a pilot who loved two things: flying fast and breaking rules. His plane wasn't much, just an old cargo hauler he'd patched together with duct tape and hope, but he'd added a few tricks of his own, like engines that ran on something he called liquid chaos. When he saw the alien ships on his cracked radar, he didn't run. He laughed. "Oh, this is gonna be fun," he said, strapping in. Around him, other pilots, some trained, some just crazy, started firing up their own machines. No one told them to. They just knew it was time. The Vorin watched from their command ship, a giant dome of glass and steel floating above Earth. Their leader, a stern figure named High Warden Kale, tapped a claw on his console. "Why aren't they afraid?" he asked. His advisors, a mix of feathered analysts and tentacled engineers, shrugged. Humans were supposed to be primitive. They fought with metal sticks and burned rocks for power. Yet the sensors showed something odd, spikes of energy popping up all over the planet. Kale leaned closer. "What are they doing?" Back on Earth, Mia's workshop roared to life. Lights blinked, machines hummed, and a big red button glowed under her hand. She'd spent years linking her inventions into a secret network: satellites, drones, even a few old radio towers she'd turned into weapons. "Let's give them a welcome party," she muttered, pressing the button. High above, a dozen satellites shifted. Panels slid open, revealing glowing coils. They weren't for weather reports anymore. A pulse of blue light shot from one, slicing through a Union scout ship like butter. The aliens scrambled, shouting orders as their screens filled with static. Meanwhile, Leo's squadron took off. His plane rattled as he pushed it past its limits, weaving through clouds toward the enemy. The others followed, farmers in crop dusters, hobbyists in gliders, even a guy in a homemade jet that looked like a flying toaster. They didn't have a plan, not really. But they had something the Vorin couldn't understand: a love for the impossible. Leo whooped as he dodged a laser, spinning his plane upside down just because he could. "Come on, you shiny jerks," he yelled into his radio. "Let's dance." The Vorin fleet fired back, sending beams of white-hot energy toward the ground. Cities shook, but humans didn't hide. In bunkers and basements, people cheered. Scientists dusted off projects they'd been told to shelve. Kids drew pictures of the ships getting smashed. It wasn't fear driving them, it was excitement. For years, they'd dreamed of something bigger, something worth fighting. Now it was here, and they weren't about to waste it. Up in orbit, Kale's advisors started to sweat, or whatever their species did when nervous. Their technology is inconsistent, one said, pointing at a screen. A human missile had just exploded into a cloud of glitter, confusing their sensors. Another ship reported losing power after a swarm of tiny drones covered it in sticky goo. They're not following the rules, another advisor cried. Kale narrowed his eyes. Then we'll make them, he said. He ordered the fleet to tighten formation, ready for a full attack. They'd crush this nonsense and move on. But on Earth, Mia and Leo weren't done. Mia's network grew stronger, linking with other tinkerers who'd been waiting for a moment like this. Leo's squadron buzzed like angry bees, drawing the aliens into a trap they didn't see coming. The Vorin thought they were in control, but humans had a saying, you don't mess with someone who's got nothing to lose. And right now, humanity had everything to gain. As the first real battle loomed, the galaxy watched. Some species placed bets. Others hid. No one knew what would happen when a perfect fleet met a planet full of dreamers who'd just been handed the best excuse to go wild. But one thing was clear, the spark was lit, and it was about to burn bright. The Vorin fleet hung in Earth's orbit like a swarm of angry wasps, their silver hulls reflecting the sunlight. High Warden Kale stood on the command deck, his claws tapping faster now. The humans were supposed to be running scared by this point, or at least sending a shaky message of surrender. Instead, the planet below buzzed with activity, like a kicked anthill that didn't know when to quit. Kale's advisors whispered nervously, their feathers ruffling and tentacles twitching. They've destroyed 3 scout ships, one reported. With junk. Kale's eyes narrowed. Junk? He ordered the fleet to begin the real assault. They'd show these primitives what a real civilization could do. Down on Earth, Mia's workshop was a whirlwind of noise and light. Sparks flew as she tweaked her plasma satellites, her hands moving faster than her brain could explain. Come on, babies, don't fail me now, she muttered to the machines. Her network was growing, other tinkerers across the planet had plugged in, linking their own crazy inventions to her system. A farmer in Iowa sent a signal from a tractor he'd turned into a laser cannon. A kid in Brazil patched in a toy robot that shot fireworks. It was messy, it was loud, and it was perfect. Mia grinned as her screens lit up with new dots. Let's make M dizzy, she said, flipping a switch. High above, the Vorin ships moved into attack formation. Beams of energy rained down, carving craters into empty fields and shattering a few unlucky rooftops. They expected screams, chaos, surrender. What they got was a flash of blue light as Mia's satellites fired back. One Vorin frigate took a direct hit, its sleek hull melting into slag. Another got tangled in a web of drones that sprayed paint across its sensors, blinding it. The alien commanders shouted in confusion as their perfect lines broke apart. What is this? Kale demanded, watching a ship spin out of control after hitting a cloud of glitter. His advisor stammered, they're improvising, sir. Meanwhile, Leo was having the time of his life. His rickety plane darted through the sky, engines roaring with that liquid chaos he'd cooked up in his garage. Behind him, his squadron followed, a mismatched fleet of whatever could fly. There was a delivery drone strapped with firecrackers, a stunt plane trailing smoke in rude shapes, even a hot air balloon with a guy tossing homemade bombs. They didn't look like much, but they moved like a storm. Leo banked hard, dodging a laser that singed his wing. Missed me, he yelled into his radio, then flipped a switch. His plane spat out a cloud of metal scraps, old bolts, nails, anything he'd swept off his floor. The junk hit a Vorin fighter, clogging its engines. It spiraled down, crashing into the ocean with a satisfying splash. The Voron tried to adapt. Their ships were built for precision, every move calculated, every shot perfect. But humans didn't play that way. Leo's squadron buzzed around them, too fast and too random to predict. A crop duster dropped a net of fishing line that tangled a Voron gunship's thrusters. A glider pilot logged a speaker blasting heavy metal, making the alien sensors glitch. On the ground, Mia's network hacked into the fleet's comms, flooding them with nonsense, recipes for soup, looped laughter, even a voice saying, "Hey, your ship's on fire, just so you know." The Voron crews scrambled to shut it off, but it was too late. Chaos was winning. Kale slammed a claw on his console. "Enough," he roared. "Target their cities. Force them to stop." The fleet shifted, aiming for bigger targets. A beam sliced through a skyscraper, toppling it in a cloud of dust. For a moment, it looked like the Voron might regain control. But then the humans answered back, not with tears, but with more tricks. Mia's satellites pulsed again, this time sending a wave of static that fried half the fleet's targeting systems. Leo's team swooped in, dropping anything they could find, paint cans, flares, even a bag of expired sausages. One Voron ship veered off course after a sausage splattered its windshield, its pilot too confused to shoot. On Earth, people watched the sky light up. In bunkers, garages, and rooftops, they cheered. A group of mechanics in a small town rolled out a cannon they'd built from scrap, firing pressurized air that knocked a low-flying scout ship into a spin. Kids ran outside with slingshots, launching rocks at drones the Voron sent to spy. It wasn't organized. It wasn't pretty. But it was everywhere. The Voron had planned for a war, they hadn't planned for this. Up in orbit, Kale's advisors were losing it. "Their weapons don't make sense," one cried, pointing at a screen. A human plane had just dropped a net of balloons filled with something sticky, glue, maybe, that gummed up a Voron cruiser's vents. Another ship was out of action because its crew couldn't stop sneezing after hitting a cloud of pepper dust. "They're not fighting like soldiers," another advisor said. "They're fighting like pests." Kale glared at them. "Then we exterminate them," he snapped. He ordered the fleet to double its firepower, to hit harder and faster. They'd burn this planet to ash if they had to. But humans didn't break that easily. Mia saw the escalation on her screens and laughed. "Oh, you wanna play rough," she said. She patched into a secret project she'd buried under her workshop, a generator that hummed with a strange, purple glow. She didn't know exactly what it would do, she'd never tested it at full power, but that was half the fun. "Here goes nothing," she muttered, cranking it up. A ripple shot into the sky, bending the air like a heatwave. Up in orbit, a Voron ship suddenly flipped upside down, its crew screaming as gravity went haywire. Mia whooped. "That's my girl." Leo felt the ripple too, his plane wobbled, but he rode it like a wave. "Nice one, whoever did that," he shouted into his radio. He didn't know Mia, but he figured someone down there was having as much fun as he was. He swung his squadron around, leading them straight into the thick of the fleet. Lasers flashed, ships exploded, and still they kept coming. A Voron fighter locked onto him, but Leo grinned and hit a button. His plane coughed out a plume of black smoke, thick, oily stuff he'd mixed himself. The alien missed its shot, and Leo cackled as he looped away. "Can't catch what you can't see." The Voron were starting to crack. Their screens showed losses they couldn't explain, ships crashing into each other, weapons jamming, crews arguing over garbled orders. Kale's calm mask slipped. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. No one had an answer. The humans weren't just fighting, they were enjoying it. Every hit they took made them louder, wilder, more creative. It was like the more you pushed them, the harder they pushed back. On Earth, the mood was electric. People weren't hiding anymore, they were joining in. A fisherman rigged his boat with harpoons to snag low-flying drones. A teacher turned her school's science lab into a bomb factory, giggling as she mixed chemicals. It was chaos, sure, but it was their chaos. And it was working. The Voran fleet, so proud and perfect, was starting to look like a toy a kid had smashed too many times. Kale stared at the mess unfolding below. His advisors were yelling now, begging to pull back. "We can't predict them," one said. "They don't even predict themselves." Kale ignored them. He'd come to teach a lesson, and he wasn't leaving until it stuck. "Full assault," he ordered. "Now." But as the fleet powered up, Mia's purple glow pulsed again, and Leo's crazy fleet dove back in. The humans weren't done, not even close. They just found their rhythm, and the galaxy was about to see what happened when you gave them a reason to let loose. The Voran fleet regrouped above Earth, their silver ships battered but still deadly. High Warden Kale's voice crackled through every comm channel, cold and sharp. "This ends now," he said. He'd had enough of the humans' tricks, their junk weapons, their noisy defiance, their refusal to just give up. The fleet's lights flared as they charged their heaviest guns, massive cannons that could turn mountains to dust. Kale leaned forward, his claws digging into his console. "Fire everything," he ordered. The sky lit up with streaks of red and gold, a storm of destruction raining down. They'd break this planet, rules or no rules. On the ground, Mia felt the rumble as the first blasts hit. Her workshop shook, tools clattering off shelves, but she didn't flinch. Dust fell from the ceiling, coating her goggles, and she wiped them with a grin. "Big toys, huh?" she said to herself. Her screens flickered, showing the damage, craters where towns used to be, fires spreading across fields. But the purple glow from her mystery generator pulsed stronger, like a heartbeat. She'd figured out it messed with gravity, twisting it in ways that made no sense. "Let's see how they like this," she muttered, slamming a lever forward. The glow erupted, shooting a wave into the sky. Up in orbit, the Voran fleet felt it hit. Ships lurched as their artificial gravity failed, crews floated, slamming into walls, equipment spinning loose. One cruiser tilted hard, smashing into its neighbor. Sparks flew across Kale's screens, and his advisors squawked in panic. "What was that?" one demanded, feathers puffed out. Kale didn't answer. He stared at the chaos, his mind racing. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were rewriting the game. Another wave hit, and a gunship flipped end over end, its cannons firing uselessly into space. "Stabilize!" Kale barked, but the humans weren't waiting. Leo's squadron soared through the madness, his plane rattling as the gravity waves shook the air. "Hang on, folks," he shouted into his radio. His team was down a few, crashes, bad luck, but the ones left were tougher than ever. He spotted a Voran ship wobbling from Mia's attack and grinned. "Time to kick them while they're down," he said, diving straight at it. His plane groaned, but he pushed harder, aiming for a gap in its armor. He flipped a switch, and a jury-rigged launcher spat out a chunk of scrap, a car engine he'd bolted on for fun. It smashed into the ship's thruster, sending it spinning toward Earth in a fireball. "Bullseye!" Leo whooped, pulling up just in time. The tide was shifting. Mia's gravity trick gave the humans an edge, and they ran with it. Across the planet, people saw their chance. In a coastal city, a dockworker named Sam rigged an old crane with a magnet, swinging it into the sky to yank a Voran drone out of the air. It crashed into the water, and he cheered, waving at his buddies to load another. In a desert, a group of campers turned their solar panels into a mirror, reflecting a Voran laser back at its source. The beam sliced through the attacking ship, and the campers high-fived, laughing like kids. It was messy, it was wild, and it was working. Kale's advisors were shouting now, their voices overlapping. "They've crippled our left flank," one said. "Their attacks are random, we can't counter them, another cried. Kale silenced them with a glare. He switched his screen to a live feed of the planet. Cities burned, yes, but humans weren't hiding. They were fighting, with whatever they had. A dot on his map blinked out, another ship gone, this time to a flock of drones carrying what looked like fireworks. Impossible, he muttered. But it wasn't. The humans were turning his perfect fleet into a punching bag. Leo's team kept the pressure on. He'd salvaged a piece of Voron tech from a wreck, a glowing orb that hummed with power. He didn't know what it did, but that didn't stop him. Let's give it a spin, he said, rigging it to his plane with some wire and tape. He flew toward a cluster of enemy ships and pressed a button. The orb pulsed, sending out a screeching sound wave that scrambled their sensors. Voron fighters veered off, crashing into each other as their screens went blank. Ha! Instant party favor. Leo yelled, banking away. His squadron followed, picking off the confused ships one by one. Mia saw the chaos on her screens and pumped a fist. That's it, keep guessing, she said. Her gravity generator was overheating, sparks spitting from its core, but she didn't care. She patched into the global network, calling out to anyone listening. Hit M with everything you've got, she shouted. The response was instant, hundreds of signals flared up. A trucker in the mountains fired a flare gun that somehow ignited a Voron fuel pod. A baker in a small village threw Molotov cocktails from her roof, cackling as they burst against a low-flying scout. The humans weren't an army, they were a storm. Kale's fleet was shrinking. His cannons roared, leveling more of Earth, but every hit just made the humans louder. A Voron battleship took aim at Mia's mountain, its beam charging with a deadly hum. She saw it coming on her screen and laughed. Oh, no you don't, she said, cranking her generator to max. The purple wave slammed into the ship mid-shot, twisting its gravity so hard the beam bent backward, carving through its own hull. The battleship exploded in a shower of sparks, and Mia leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. That's what you get, she said. Up above, Leo dodged another blast, his plane creaking like it might fall apart. He didn't mind. The Voron were on the ropes, and he could feel it. He patched into his squadron's radio. We've got M scared, let's make M run, he said. His team answered with cheers, diving back into the fight. A stunt pilot lobbed a paint-filled balloon that splattered a Voron bridge, blinding its crew. A delivery drone dropped a speaker blasting static, throwing off their comms. It wasn't pretty, but it was pure human, stubborn, creative, and unstoppable. Kale's advisors were begging now. We must retreat, High Warden, one said, his voice shaking. They're not breaking, they're getting stronger. Kale stared at the screens, watching his fleet unravel. A ship vanished in a puff of smoke, hit by something his sensors couldn't even identify. Another spun out of control, caught in a net of cables launched from who knows where. He'd come to teach a lesson, but the humans were the ones teaching him. How? He whispered. No species fought like this. No species enjoyed it like this. On Earth, the mood was wildfire. People weren't just surviving, they were thriving. A fisherman hauled a crashed Voron drone onto his boat, prying it open to see what he could use. A teacher rallied her students to build a slingshot big enough to launch tires into the sky, knocking out a scout ship. Every hit, every crazy idea, fueled them more. They weren't winning with power, they were winning with heart. Kale finally spoke, his voice low. Prepare the flagship, he said. His advisors froze. The flagship was their last card, a monster of a ship, armed to the teeth. We end this ourselves, he said. The fleet pulled back, rallying around the giant vessel as it powered up, its shadow darkening the planet below. But Mia saw it too, her screens flashing red. She cracked her knuckles. Big guy wants to play. Fine by me. Leo, weaving through the wreckage, caught sight of the flagship and grinned. "Oh, that's a challenge," he said, spinning his plane toward it. The humans weren't done, not by a long shot. The tide had turned, and they were ready to ride it all the way. The Voron flagship loomed over Earth, a colossus of metal and menace. Its hull glowed with energy, cannons bristling like teeth on a beast. High Warden Kale stood at its heart, his silver skin reflecting the red lights of the command deck. His fleet was in tatters, ships lost to junk, crews broken by tricks, but he still had this. The flagship was unbeatable, a symbol of the Galactic Union's might. "They'll beg for mercy," he said, his voice steady despite the sweat on his advisors' faces. He pressed a button, and the ship's main cannon hummed to life, aiming straight for Earth's biggest city. One shot to end it all. On the ground, Mia's screens screamed warnings as the flagship powered up. Her workshop was a mess, wires sparking, machines smoking, but her eyes gleamed. "That's your move?" she said, laughing. Her gravity generator was fried, but she had one last card, a wormhole device she'd built in secret. It was a box of gears and glowing tubes, untested and probably insane. "Perfect," she muttered, hooking it to her network. She patched into every tinkerer still online. "Anyone got juice left? I need a boost." Voices crackled back, mechanics, kids, even a guy with a windmill. They fed her power, and the wormhole device whirred, its light turning the room green. Up in the sky, Leo saw the flagship's cannon glow and knew time was short. His plane was barely holding together, wings scorched, engine coughing, but he didn't care. "Big fish needs a hook," he said, grinning. He patched into his squadron, now a ragged band of survivors. "One last run, folks. Let's make it loud." They answered with hoots and cheers, their patched-up machines roaring to life. Leo clutched the Voron orb he'd salvaged, its hum buzzing in his hands. "Time to see what you really do," he said, rigging it to his launcher. He aimed for the flagship and floored it. The flagship fired. A beam of white-hot energy tore through the atmosphere, slamming into the ocean near a city. Water erupted in a geyser, waves crashing ashore, but the humans didn't blink. Mia's device hit full power at the same moment, its green light pulsing skyward. A tear opened in space, a swirling hole of black and blue, right in front of the flagship. Kale's advisors gasped. "What is that?" one shrieked. The beam bent, sucked into the wormhole, and vanished. Kale's claws froze mid-tap. "Impossible," he hissed. Leo's squadron charged. He fired the orb, and it streaked toward the flagship, bursting into a web of crackling energy. It latched onto the ship's hull, frying its shields in a shower of sparks. "That's for you!" Leo yelled, banking away as his team unleashed everything, fireworks, scrap, even a barrel of paint that splashed the flagship's bridge. The Voron crew scrambled, blinded and confused. The wormhole pulsed again, and Mia tweaked its controls. "Let's send them a gift," she said. The hole shifted, spitting the cannon's beam back out, straight at the fleet. 2 Voron ships exploded, caught in their own fire. Kale slammed his console. "Regroup. Fire again," he roared. But the humans were everywhere. On Earth, people joined the storm. A fisherman launched a harpoon that pierced a Voron fighter's engine. A kid with a drone dropped nails into a thruster, sending it crashing. A trucker rammed a wrecked alien ship with his rig, laughing as it crumpled. Mia's network pulsed with ideas, bombs from scrap, lasers from headlights, anything that worked. The wormhole danced under her fingers, sucking in enemy missiles and spitting them back in random bursts. Leo dodged a laser, his plane shuddering. "Come on, old girl, one more trick," he said, patting the dashboard. He spotted the flagship's cannon charging again and had an idea. "Mia, you hearing me?" he shouted into his radio. Her voice crackled back. "Loud and crazy, fly boy. Leo grinned. Point that hole at their big gun. I'm bringing dessert. He swung his squadron around, leading them in a reckless charge. They dropped everything, junk, bombs, a toaster someone had wired to explode. It rained on the flagship, clogging its vents and cracking its hull. Mia saw the plan and laughed. You're nuts, and I love it. She twisted the wormhole, aiming it at the cannon. The green light flared, and when the flagship fired, the beam vanished into the hole. Seconds later, it erupted behind the ship, blasting its own engines. The flagship lurched, smoke pouring from its rear. Kale stumbled as the deck shook. Stabilize, he yelled, but his advisors were fleeing to escape pods. We're done, High Warden, one screamed. Kale glared at the screens, watching his pride unravel. Leo's team didn't stop. A glider pilot crashed into a Voron turret, taking it out in a blaze of glory. A drone swarm covered the flagship in sticky tar, gumming its guns. Leo looped back, firing his last shot, a chunk of metal that smashed a sensor array. That's for Earth, he shouted. The flagship tilted, its power flickering. Mia cranked her device to max, the wormhole growing wilder. Time to go home, she said, slamming a button. The hole snapped open wide, swallowing the flagship's front half. It tore apart, metal screeching as it vanished into the void. The fleet broke. Voron ships fled, limping away as the wormhole spat sparks and debris. Kale's last transmission was a garbled curse, cut off as his pod ejected into space. On Earth, cheers erupted, bunkers, rooftops, streets alive with noise. Mia slumped in her chair, the wormhole device sizzling as it died. Worth it, she said, grinning. Leo landed his plane, wheels skidding on a cracked runway. He climbed out, laughing as his team mobbed him. We showed M, he yelled, fist in the air. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. The Union's unbeatable fleet was gone, chased off by a planet of dreamers and fighters. Humans didn't win with fancy ships or perfect plans, they won with grit, guts, and a knack for turning trash into treasure. The Voron had come to tame them, but they'd unleashed a storm instead. Across Earth, people hugged, cried, and started rebuilding, not out of fear, but pride. They'd faced the worst and come out stronger. Mia dusted off her goggles, already sketching a new idea. Next time, we'll be ready, she said to herself. Leo kicked his plane's tire, grinning at the sky. Bring it on, he muttered. The fight was over, but the spirit wasn't. The galaxy had learned something: mess with humans, and you'd get more than you bargained for. They weren't just survivors, they were creators, chaos and all. And somewhere out there, among the stars, the story wasn't done. Not by a long shot.